Hi, this is Ryan from Dystopian Radio. It's November 10th, 2022. Check us out at disruptarian.com and all the various social media platforms. So I've been putting a lot of thought into what I'm considering as thought control, as these new pronoun laws and these new hate speech laws and all these things that are going on which controls people's speech, where now people in some areas of the world, New York is one of them, Canada is one of them, other places too are changing their laws to force people to call a biological woman a male and a biological male a woman, and whatever they want. And this is something that reminded me of George Orwell's 1984. So I'm going to quote you a few things, and then I'm going to play both 1984 and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, because I found a common pattern in these dystopian futures that they predicted 50, 70, 100 years ago. And even Ayn Rand, wrote a lot about these dystopian societies that become totalitarian, and they become so anti-human, free will or freedom, and, just a control factor, a machine, an industry, and they do it by removing the importance of the family. And this is mostly in Orwell and Huxley. But the theme shows this totalitarian government that then changes human nature and makes people resent or hate the nuclear family, so-called, mom, dad, and kids. Where now they force you to, say things that aren't true. And if you don't, you can be criminally penalized or financially penalized by the force of the government. So here's one thing that it made me think of when all this stuff came around. And so the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command, from the book 1984. Now, this just rings true of what we see in society now, like the predictions manifest. So I'm going to play you a couple of videos just to illustrate my point. And then at the end, I want to talk about how other people are seeing the destruction of the nuclear family, whether it be higher crime rates, more broken children, with all the single mother stuff and everything else that, they miss out on the father, they miss out on the guidance and the love of the father, and they go looking for father figures, and they find trouble. And or whether it be, welfare state that's very costly, all these other things. And it does create a dystopian society. You look at our prison system, from back when the nuclear family thrived, and it was mom, dad, and kids, not mom and kids, or, kids on their own as it is sometimes. But it was mom, dad, and kids. And we had a very small prison population, very high prosperity, very happy, content people. And people's lives, were more, sustainable and mentally and financially sustainable. But now everything's broken, and there's so much trouble, and there's so much crime, and there's so much murder, and there's so much this and that. And we can blame it on the government's not doing enough. I don't blame the government for not doing enough. Sometimes I blame the government for doing too much. These pronoun laws, I believe, are too much. A lot of this stuff that destroys the nuclear family, that, paints fathers as non-essential, is a big part of it. But I don't believe the government's doing too little, trust me. And this is why. I'm going to play you a couple of clips.
In the novel, 1984, author George Orwell presents a dystopian world in which technological advancements keep party leaders and the masses under careful observation and constant control. The novel's protagonist, Winston Smith, is a citizen of the superstate Oceania, an oligarchy of hierarchical rule under the principles of English socialism known as INGSOC. Altogether, 3 totalitarian states, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, exist and are constantly at war with each other. In Oceania, the party consists of inner party members who are the ruling elite and regular party members who are citizens. Winston has never quite accepted the party and its ideological principles of INGSOC. He believes in an unalterable past and finds party politics reprehensible. Winston wishes for privacy, intimacy, freedom, and love, but cannot openly express these thought crimes for fear of imprisonment or death. The propaganda is so powerful that the people around him begin shouting at the screen. Of course, Winston must join in to avoid suspicion. A lead party member who often attends the 2 Minutes Hate suddenly takes on an important role in Winston's life. He introduces himself to Winston as O'Brien, then discreetly gives him his home address on a slip of paper. Winston suspects that the party leader has approached him because he is part of the underground movement, thinking that his true path towards rebellion has finally begun. After some time, Winston and Julia visit O'Brien, who, as an inner party member, lives lavishly and has the freedom to turn off his telescreen. Winston agrees to renounce the party and discusses his true beliefs. O'Brien welcomes Winston and Julia into the Brotherhood and tells them that they must be willing to do anything to work towards its cause. They agree, but say that they will not do anything that would prevent them from seeing each other again. During Hate Week, the party's enemy becomes East Asia rather than Eurasia, and Winston must work long hours to correct all party publications referring to war with Eurasia. The party is now at war with East Asia, and has always been at war with East Asia. During Hate Week, a mysterious man brings Winston a briefcase, then leaves abruptly. Inside is a book that Winston reads aloud to Julia later at Mr. Charrington's apartment. He reads about the revealing history of Oceania, capitalism versus totalitarianism, and the main goals of the party until they both fall asleep. Winston wakes up hours later, repeating his oft-stated phrase, "We are the dead." Suddenly a voice coming from the wall echoes him, "You are the dead." There's a telescreen hidden behind a picture on the wall. When uniformed men storm the room with Mr. Charrington, it becomes clear that he is a member of the thought police. He has been disguised as a kind old man, but is far younger than Winston imagined. Winston and Julia are arrested, separated, and brought to the Ministry of Love. While in a holding cell, Winston realizes that O'Brien was never part of the underground movement, but actually works in the Ministry of Love. Winston is violently tortured at first, and he is forced to admit to a litany of crimes he did not commit, including murder and espionage. O'Brien begins to break Winston's spirit, telling him that his memory is flawed and that he is insane. The party, O'Brien explains with a lunatic intensity, seeks absolute power for power's own sake. This is why it will always be successful, is always right, and will ultimately control the entire world. Winston cannot argue, as he faces obstinate and illogical fallacies, all the while being subjected to torture. Little by little, O'Brien shows Winston, with the use of electric shock machines, beatings, and starvation, the way of the party. He forces Winston to accept that if the party says so, 2 + 2 = 5. Broken to the core, Winston finally submits to his re-education. He is no longer beaten, is fed at regular intervals, and is allowed to sleep, though the lights never go out. Although he seems to accept the party's reality, Winston still clings to the last remaining kernel of himself and his humanity, his love for Julia. O'Brien attempts to force Winston to betray Julia. He takes Winston to room 101, containing the worst thing in the world, which is different for everyone. Winston is bound to a chair where O'Brien attaches a mask cage to his face. The contraption contains huge, hungry, and carnivorous rats. Winston feels a desperate, deep, panicked fear. He cannot take it, and finally screams for O'Brien to put someone else in his place. Anyone, even Julia. O'Brien has succeeded in brainwashing his subordinate. Winston, a damaged, changed, empty shell of a man is released into the world. In his new life, he sees Julia once, by chance, but they are no longer in love. Each betrayed the other, and prison changed them powerfully. There is no hope for their relationship. In the final pages of the novel, Winston obtains a somewhat trivial, meaningless job that pays surprisingly well. He spends his time at a cafe drinking Victory gin and playing chess in his regular seat. Upon hearing that Oceania has successfully repelled Eurasian's war advances, he stares reverently into the eyes of a man with dark hair and a big mustache. Winston cries. He has finally completed the rehabilitation he started in the Ministry of Love. He loves Big Brother.
Brave New World is about a futuristic society that has tried to create a perfect community where everyone is happy. They use science to mass-produce people and condition them to do and want only the things they're supposed to. But in doing that, they take away freedoms, like the freedom to think for oneself. The few characters we see who do think for themselves aren't happy, so the novel poses a question. Is it better to be happy or free? The book starts with the director of the Central London Hatching and Conditioning Center explaining to a group of students how they create people, since women don't actually get pregnant anymore. Eggs are fertilized and then undergo a process that causes the fertilized eggs to divide. They can get up to 96 identical twins from a single fertilized egg this way. The director brings the group into one of the conditioning rooms. Nurses lay out flowers and books and then bring in a group of babies. Then they shock the babies through an electrified strip in the floor. Over time, the babies will learn to instinctively dislike books and nature. These babies are deltas, one of the society's lower castes, and the lower castes perform non-intellectual jobs like factory work. By conditioning the delta babies to hate books, the society ensures that they won't ever have any desire for them, and by conditioning them to hate flowers and nature, they'll want to stay near their work in the cities. They condition all the castes this way, according to what their role will be in the community. The group continues into an outdoor garden, where several hundred naked children are engaged in erotic play. This play conditions the children to grow up feeling comfortable being sexually promiscuous. The group runs into Mustafa Mond, a very powerful man and one of the 10 world controllers. He tells them what it was like in the past, when mothers gave birth to children and people grew up in families, and adults still paired off into monogamous couples. Everyone is really grossed out by the idea of mothers and families. Bernard and Lenina go to the Savage Reservation and witness a ritual where a young man must remain silent while he's whipped. The square empties out, and a young savage approaches Bernard and Lenina. Unlike the others, he's white, and he speaks English. This savage, whose name is John, wanted to be whipped, to prove he's a man and to sacrifice his body for the village. He explains that his mother, Linda, wasn't from the reservation. She had been visiting with a man, and while on a walk in the mountains, she fell down a ravine and hit her head. Some hunters from the village found her and carried her back. She was already pregnant with John, who was born and raised in the village. Bernard remembers the director's story. John takes them to see his mother. She's thrilled to see civilized people and tells them how awful it is on the reservation, with the women having babies all the time, and the people pair off into couples and only have sex with that person. Outside, John tells Bernard about his childhood in the village. His mother often got drunk and slept with a man named Popé. John hated him, and he remembers the time when some of the village women held his mother down and whipped her because she kept sleeping with their husbands. But Linda taught John to read, and one day Popé brought him a copy of the complete works of Shakespeare. John read the book all the time because he loved the language and to deal with his loneliness. Bernard invites John to come back to London with them, and he says Linda can come too. He knows he can use her as leverage against the director. Lenina feels so stressed from everything that she takes a bunch of soma and spends a day asleep. John comes looking for Bernard and finds her there. He's been in love with her since he first saw her. He wants to touch her, but he won't allow himself to. They all arrive back in London, and Bernard is called to come see the director at work. The director announces that to keep Bernard from infecting others with his unorthodoxy, he's sending him to Iceland. But Bernard calls Linda in, and she immediately recognizes the director, and says that she had a baby because of him. John comes in and falls to his knees in front of the director, calling him my father over and over. The director is horrified. It's obscene to talk about pregnancy, and shameful to be called a father. and all the workers laugh hysterically like it's all a dirty joke, until the director runs. Her refusal to sleep with Lenina has Lenina thinking of him constantly. Finally, she decides to act and goes to his apartment. She marches in, and when John mentions marriage, she's horrified. She decides to take her clothes off and get him into bed. He becomes enraged and calls her a whore. Lenina runs into the bathroom to hide. John gets a phone call about his mother and leaves. Linda is at the hospital, and as John tries to speak to her, she keeps dozing off because she's on a high dose of soma. Making the situation worse, several young boys who are in the room for death conditioning keep gawking at her. Then Linda dies, and as John rushes out of the room, he shoves one of the boys over in a rage. In the hospital's vestibule, John runs into a group of workers getting their soma rations. He freaks out and starts shouting that soma is poison. He says they're all slaves, and he's going to make them free. Then he starts throwing the soma out the window. Bernard and Helmholtz get a call and go to find John at the hospital. When they get there, a brawl is going on. Helmholtz jumps in to help John, while Bernard basically can't decide what to do. John, Bernard, and Helmholtz are brought to Mustafa Mond, who explains to them why old things like Shakespeare are prohibited. First, society needs people to want new things, not old ones. People have to keep buying and consuming for the sake of the economy. You also can't write or understand tragedies without social instability, and social instability no longer exists. They've made everyone happy, and engineered a perfect society where everyone plays a role exactly suited to their desires and abilities. Mond says sometimes people don't fit in their roles. He was one of those people. He had the choice of being sent away to an island or joining a program to become a world controller. Bernard and Helmholtz are going to be sent to islands with other people who don't fit in. Bernard freaks out and is escorted from the room. Helmholtz goes to check on him, and Mond and John keep talking. Mond says they've also gotten rid of God. God and religion are only compatible with a society where people get old and suffer losses. God and religion also lead to self-denial. But modern industrial civilization only works when people indulge every desire. It keeps people buying things, and it keeps them from ever feeling any real passion or frustration, which can lead to instability. When they do feel something, they have soma to keep them happy. John says he doesn't like it. He would rather be free to suffer losses, get sick, and grow old. So Bernard and Helmholtz are sent to different islands, and John goes to live in a deserted lighthouse in the countryside. He enjoys living alone, but he thinks he enjoys it too much, so he whips himself as punishment. Crowds and reporters start turning up at the lighthouse, demanding that the savage do his whipping stunt. Eventually, a huge crowd appears, and they end up beating one another in front of John's house while chanting "Orgy Porgy." When John wakes up the next day, he remembers everything and feels horrified. When the crowd comes back that night, they find him hanging. For more information about Brave New World, check out the Brave New World SparkNote at sparknotes.com.
Societies are built off of families.
Core
Families
can be
so
different.
is it good for society and people in general to have baby mamas left and right? Is that good? Is that good for a family? Is that a healthy situation for a kid to grow up in?
If you have people who aren't understanding, who aren't compassionate, and who aren't able to provide love, then no, I would say it's not a good society. But I think our society is.
Do you think in general, wait, can I just say, would you say in general, it's good for a kid to be raised by a single mother? In general, just yes or no?
I would say that
yes or no.
This is kind of relevant.
No, I know, but I just need.
I think it can be. It just depends on the community that's around them.
It can. Okay.
It really doesn't.
It does.
Even though that puts a kid at every statistical disadvantage, they're more likely to run away from home. They're more likely to drop out of school.
Because we live in a system that doesn't support single mothers, doesn't support people. We live in a divided system.
Okay. How do you not support single mothers when if you get pregnant, you can have an abortion and you get free housing if you get pregnant?
I think housing,
if you're a single mother,
is
and you get government benefits.
Those are basic human rights, though.
Right,
the right
but
to be able to live.
That doesn't happen to men. They're just homeless. They're just homeless.
So then I see an issue with that too. I think we all deserve compassion, and we deserve to live in a society where everyone has their basic human rights met.
Right, but I'm saying who pays for it? Who pays for it? Like,
that's a conversation we need to start having. It's a conversation we genuinely need to start having if we want everyone to live at a certain standard and actually be able to live.
And then how do we like, why do I have to pay for someone who made poor decisions? Like, if you chose to be a single mother, I didn't choose to do that. I damn well could be pregnant right now. Like, why do I have to pay for someone else's bad decision? You made that decision. And like oftentimes we try to take accountability off of women and we stop them from facing the consequences of your decisions. Like that was a decision you made.
No, and I agree. I think everyone should have accountability, but that we also can't place blame on people.
But that comes with accountability. It's blame.
But when you place the blame, right, wouldn't working out how we could make a better system.
Like accountability is saying that was my fault and taking blame. So like even earlier when they were being accountable, they were saying, yeah, I'm taking the blame.
So collectively educating people to not make those decisions, right? To make decisions.
No, I think women are educated. We just choose not to. I mean, you know what you're doing when you have sex. You know when you're ovulating. You know if you're on birth control or not on birth control. You know all of these things and you make a choice. I
would say the way we are educated maybe is kind of the wrong focus, because we're not educated around emotional stability. We choose men who leave, or we choose men who aren't going to stand up, because like you said last time that we choose to ignore red flags, right? And I said there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? And we aren't really taught, about how our relationships with our parents or how our, primary relationships really govern the relationships that we choose, right? And so a lot of us go through that kind of space not being aware of what we're choosing. And I'm not saying that removes accountability. I say you have to be accountable, but if we can create a system that teaches people about these dynamics, we can stop that from happening.
I think women know we just don't care. I mean, I have sat down with friends and said, yo, here's red flag number 1. Here's red flag number 2. Here's a PowerPoint on why this isn't going to work. And women, we don't care, because when we like a guy, we just see no evil, hear no evil.
Right.
And if you end up in a bad situation and you get pregnant by that guy, like, it doesn't matter. Women don't care.
As a matter of fact, last time when you were on the show, I read a bunch of statistics as to when it comes to single mothers, right?
But then
hang on, I read a bunch of statistics as to why single children born of single mothers are at statistically a disadvantage when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to prison, when it comes to adoption, when it comes to all of these things. And still, even with all the statistics, people find a way in which to justify a reason to become a single mother, right? And it's like, when you speak, I'm not saying that, what you're saying isn't valid. I'm saying, regardless, after you speak, the statistics are still there.
But I would also,
they are still there.
But like I said last time, I would say there are other factors that go into that. There's factors with the system, right? People living in poverty, people living in circumstances that they aren't able to properly give support to a child, right? And I'm not saying that society has to step up and necessarily support that. I think we should live in a more collective and collaborative society where everyone puts in the same amount of effort.
I think I should have $5 million in my bank account, but I don't.
I don't think that's relevant to what I was saying, but fair enough. I hope it happens.
You think, but the reality is different.
Yeah,
do you know what I'm saying?
I know,
so the reality is different.
But how can we shift the reality if we don't think ahead to the way we can do things better, the way we can support people better, right? How can we change the world we're in to help people live if we don't think about that, if we don't have these conversations?
I would say by taking accountability for your decisions and saying, don't sleep around with men you don't want to be fathers with. I'm saying like, take accountability for your lot in life. Hey, if you get pregnant and you're a single mom, no one's bailing you out because that's a poor decision.
Yeah.
Like I think that would remove like, even we had this grandma on here, Auntie Jenny, and she was saying like people in her day would get pregnant because they wanted to move out of their house and the government got them a house.
That's in my day.
Yeah. Oh shit.
In my day, women would get pregnant just so they can get a flat, just so they can get an apartment. Because UK government would give you an apartment if you were a single mother.
And I think you have a really positive like worldview where you think maybe people won't take advantage of that, but they do.
No, and I'm aware of that, and I do know that I have a very I'm aware of that within myself. It's not whimsical.
Whimsical.
I'm working on grounding it, which is why I enjoy being in spaces like this, because it helps pull me out of that. But I don't think it's impossible to be able to build a world like that. And I do agree that people will take advantage of it, right? But it's about getting to a point where they don't have to take advantage of it, where we can educate people about accountability and making better choices, right? But we have to also bring compassion and understanding before we do that. Understand why people are in these situations so you can shift it.
So what happens when you educate people and they don't care? So I'll give you I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So I have a relative. Okay, I'm not gonna. Sometimes my family's watching these lives, so I gotta be more broad.
Don't call them out, bro.
No, sometimes I be a little too specific in my stories, and I hear back. I have a relative, and she is someone who will probably be homeless and on the street. And the reason is because she is a single mom, and the reason is because she made poor decisions where she was an alcoholic for years and stole from every relative until everyone was sick of taking care of her.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why does she need to get bailed out because she makes poor decisions? She robbed all of us.
And I agree, right? Again, accountability is
what led to those decisions. I don't know. Her brother.
Trauma.
That's what I mean, and that's what I'm saying. You have to understand this. And I'm not saying it's not an excuse, right? They still have to take accountability for it. That people who have mental health episodes, who you're awful to people, still have to take accountability for that. But if you can understand the root of it, you can begin to shift it. Right? That's generational.
You can understand the root and still take accountability. And by dealing with the consequences and having no one bail you out. Like my dad grew up in the same home. He grew up to be a multimillionaire with 10 kids and a beautiful family. And so it's like same house. You like, and that's what I'm saying. You don't have an excuse. Like she doesn't have an excuse. She had the, I
have a very similar family situation. Funnily enough, it's actually sorry.
But
I have a very similar family situation where my dad was someone who built himself out of that situation. He made better choices, and he provided me the life I had because he made a decision to get out. And the rest of his family didn't really do that. And I've seen that, right? And I understand that, but I still think they deserve compassion for what they've had to struggle with, right? Some people are predisposed to making bad choices, and but just based on I guess reactivity to certain things that happen.
And